exactly where I want to go.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when I heard you say that, well, I saw my future, and if I can lie my partners up, I can see that experience being repeated over and over again. And I'd love to hear a little bit more in depth of what was that path for you like in your adult life, searching for that romantic relationship, which is family, really.
Yes, I wanted a family. I wanted a healthy family my whole life. It was my biggest goal. And, you know, when you're in a trauma reenactment, but you don't know that that's what it is the most painful and maddening experience, because no situation looks the exact same from the beginning. You don't see the similarities. You only see maybe the thing that's different from the last time. And so here's the evidence, it's going to be different. And sure enough, you go down the road a little ways and it's like, oh, wait a second. This person is a compulsive liar, or they're cheating, or they're totally unavailable. They don't really want the same things at all. And I was like, how did I end up here again? So there were two major trauma reenactments for decades, sadly. That was one, the one of like trying to date and find like a healthy relationship. The other one was, while I'm looking for a partner who's appropriate, I would find myself being pursued by older, inappropriate, often married, mentor type men. And I was like, do I have a sandwich board that says looking for a corrective experience? Like it still kind of baffles me, to be honest, that like you go through your life, like, how do you find these people? How do they find you? How does this thing end up happening again? And in both cases, what I've come to understand about trauma allowed me to make sense to myself for the first time ever. Okay. Because I wrote my story not because I forgot it. I never forgot what happened. I was actively in therapy for most of my life. I've been in 12-step programs since I was 21 years old, sober for almost 30 years. I've done Al-Anon, I've done spiritual retreats. I have been hustling for mental health, like in any way. I got 3 degrees in psychology. I've written another book on spiritual bypass. It's like I was trying so hard, and yet these things were still being reenacted and recreated over and over. And so what I finally came to understand is that I can have all of this information, all of this desire. You can't maybe see if you're listening on audio, but I'm pointing to my head, right? My brain that sort of likes to think that I'm going to figure it all out. It's always my greatest tool in my tool belt. I'm going to figure it out. But what I didn't know is that my body was essentially, my nervous system was forged. I learned everything in the context of a really chaotic, dysfunctional, abusive system. And our bodies are brilliant, and we have these amazing trauma responses, fight, flight, freeze, and what I now know as fawn, that help us survive these environments. And with complex trauma in particular, when you've been living in a chronic trauma response, it becomes fixed. It starts to feel as though it's your personality even, and you don't even know that it's a trauma response. So I was engaging, in all of the trauma responses, throughout my story, but the fawning trauma response, which is essentially the heartbeat of codependency. It's that deep, deep instinct that let me know as a young girl that if I behave a certain way, and if I smile, and if I'm funny, I'm going to stay in my stepdad's good graces a little bit longer before that switch flips and suddenly I have the silent treatment and I don't exist in my own home and I'm grounded for weeks at a time. And I learned in that environment that fawning was my salvation. It's this mirroring and merging with others' perceived desires, and I didn't know that I was doing that. And the thing is, I learned how to find safety, at least a modicum of safety in that environment. And so where my body felt most alive and turned on and competent was in surviving a chaotic, dysfunctional exploitative environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in other words, I didn't experience actual safety in my life growing up. I didn't experience my actual worth or vulnerability or authenticity. I experienced, I know how to get through this thing if I become whoever you need me to be. And so it was like, that was my half of the equation. And then my body just, that was my chemistry, right? So I always thought like, well, I can't change who I'm attracted to. I'm just attracted to who I'm attracted to. But I didn't know that my chemistry, my attraction was actually this trauma reenactment. When I had those crazy, crazy butterflies, that it was like, oh, it's happening again. And here's why trauma reenactment sort of makes sense from a physiological survival perspective. Our body wants a do-over. It wants to resolve this thing. It wants to figure it out and fix it. So it has to be back in that environment. It's survival of the fittest, right? It's like, oh gosh, that didn't work back there. I need to relearn this thing. I need a little more conditioning around it. So all of these conditions led to this unconscious attraction to people that were unavailable, addicted, abusive, whatever. I felt one more time like, I know how to handle this.
Let me show you how good I am.
Yes, it was the same scenario. And when I heard this line, it took away so much shame. I don't know who said it to this day. Red flags don't look like red flags when they feel like home. I couldn't see a red flag if you were waving it in front of my face. It was just like, oh, you're a liar. Yeah, that I can cope with that. That's something, right? So in hindsight, I can see these red flags. I could not see them at the time.
I remember in this relationship that I shared with you, at some point it got so bad. And I was like, if this is as bad as it gets, like I can put up with this. I can handle it.
Oh my
and now
God.
I look back and I think about that. I'm like, oh my God, what a life that would have been, you know? But it was such that experience of like, I can fix it, you know? And it wasn't until the silent treatment, something that you brought up. I think it's something that's so violent that also was in that relationship. Let's talk a little bit about the silent treatment. Why do people use that as really an attack?
Oh, it's so brutal. I didn't even have the language of the silent treatment growing up. I was just like, why does he pretend like I don't exist? So as a kid, and I lived with my brother, my biological brother, and my stepbrother, we all lived in the same house, and we would come out to breakfast in the morning. And when I was in a silent treatment phase, and I was the only one who got it, I'm sure my mom got it too in her way, but I wasn't as privy to that. It wasn't as obvious. But we'd come into the, dining room, and my stepdad would say, "Good morning, son. Good morning, Josh." And he just wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't speak to me. I was literally a ghost in my own home.
Wow.
And I hated him for it. And I knew that it was like just so effed up. But it didn't change the impact. This is another area where I was like, I thought that knowing that it was like cruel should relieve me of the feelings that it evoked. And it didn't. Wow. I had to just go through that experience of feeling like I was a ghost in my own home. Developmentally, when I'm coming into myself as a teenager for the first time, and it was so devastating. And I didn't know until, recently and in writing the book and sort of putting my story in context that it is such a common manipulation tactic, right? Because it's a part of that intermittent reinforcement that establishes the trauma bond. I can sort of give you, but then I got to rip it all away. And it's a powerful way to rip it all away. And it leaves you feeling like, who doesn't want to be seen? Who doesn't want to be acknowledged? Who doesn't want to feel like they literally exist? That's what it took for me. Like I literally didn't exist.
And what comes up to mind for me when I hear you is like, what did I do wrong?
Yes, of course.
Wrong? And then you're just trying to figure it out. And I think nowadays, not only you can get that in real life, but with the texting and the messaging and the Instagramming, there's so many more ways to be like in the silent treatment
Yeah.
spectrum. You know, there's nothing that I hear more from people than, oh, he never texts me back. And even this guy, like, you know, wouldn't text me back and then would, and then wouldn't, and then would,
Right.
and, you know, and that consistently fear of like, oh my God, even to the end, I was like, I don't even know if I want to communicate with you and have this experience of maybe you won't respond.
Yes.
You know, and I came to a place, and it took, my God, so much to get there. And I was reading a book about forgiveness and, you know, what makes you feel so free from that experience. And I realized that like, oh, I'm holding this over this guy's head because in a way, it's the only thing that I have that still connects me to him. And in a way, I'm still hoping, and I would love to talk about hope as this really dangerous thing in a narcissistic relationship. Like, he's gonna change. He's gonna realize, you know, oh, that conversation sounded like he, you know, kind of got a little bit of empathy. Maybe, you know, in this position of being a teacher, like a 40-year-old dude, you know what I mean? Which is so bizarre.
Exactly. We're trying to parent our partners.
Yeah.
I think this is the thing that surprised me the most when I was in the thick of my story and writing and really coming to terms with what I actually needed to heal. And this is what actually we need to break a trauma bond, which is the hardest, most painful thing I think there is to do. One of them anyway. I call it toxic hope because it's not actually hope. It's really magical thinking. It's really our own version of future faking, because we've drummed up this whole future scenario of what it's going to be like. And it's allowing us to bypass our reality right now. And so when you said, I'm trying to go back to exactly what you said. It was something about the experience that you were having in the moment and maybe how painful it was. That's the reality. That, oh, I know. It was like, oh, I can tolerate this. Like, oh, I've got that, right? So when when our reality is filled with us looking at, like, how much can I tolerate? We really need to get honest with ourselves and go, is that the life that I want to be living? How much can I tolerate? And what if I shifted that question just for a moment to go, do I feel seen, respected, heard? What I really want for myself in my life, whatever that thing is, do I see those things being met? Very different questions than this, what if they finally come around, you know? So I couldn't believe how much hope was getting in my way. The biggest place in my life was hoping that my mom was finally going to believe me 30 years later. In fact, I'll be honest, a big part of me wrote this book like the last ditch effort for like, here's all the evidence. He's gone now, right? I feel safer. Maybe you feel safer too. Maybe you can finally see the truth of him, of me. And I amassed it all in this storytelling package, probably like 100% certain that she was finally going to come around. And she didn't. And when she didn't, I saw how my hope was keeping me tethered to what was one of the most destructive relationships actually of my whole life.
Yeah.
And it's a horrible, horrible question to have to ask yourself. Gosh, if I have to choose my relationship with me or my relationship with anybody, in this case, it was my mom, you know, what a horrible choice. But I felt like I did finally have to make it. And for me today, in any relationship, if I'm doing more tolerating and more sucking up and more abandoning myself and more I don't really exist and your pain matters more than mine and I have more resources or whatever the justification is for me to let myself be steamrolled and a doormat and disrespected, I will not choose it anymore. I cannot choose it anymore. And there's a part of me that goes, even as I say that, I go, oh no, people are going to think I'm selfish, right? Because it feels selfish when you've done that your whole life, when you've abandoned yourself for other people because you're going to fix the whole system. It feels selfish to stop doing it. And it's not. Healthy boundaries feel mean. They go, oh God, it's not mean. It's just new. and we're not used to it. And it's a practice. And the more that I've done these things, the more comfort I have felt within them, the more access to myself that I've had. It's just life-changing across the board. It changes everything. It changes who you're attracted to. It changes who's attracted to you. It takes that like crazy chemistry. You know, my now husband, I was married before, and we won't go into that, but it sounds a lot like your relationship. And I really thought, because when that ended, I was in my late 30s, and I was like, you know what? Great. I really went for it, and I wanted to have a family and be loved and love, and I'm incapable. And it was the most painful, devastating experience in my life. I couldn't go to friends' baby showers anymore. I couldn't go to their 1-year-old's birthday parties, because it was like being stabbed with 100 needles everywhere in my body all at one time. It was visceral. And I also know that leaving my first marriage, which was at the end of my 30s, it was the first time I'd ever broken up with anyone, all the way back to like my first boyfriend in 5th grade. Because I stay all for these same reasons, right? Yep. Giving you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to see the best in you. Dr. Ramani, for people that are familiar with her work on narcissistic abuse, she's just like a powerhouse, a storehouse of all the information. She's like, benefit of the doubt are some of the most dangerous phrases in the English language, right? It's like, because we hang in there and we stay. So I'd always done that until I didn't. And so in a weird way, my first marriage became kind of a success, because it was the first time I looked someone in the eye and said, I will no longer wait for you to see me and respect me. I'm going to choose me even if you never do. And that was a huge piece of my healing, that actionable. It wasn't just like pretty words. It was like I literally had to walk away from a marriage that I took seriously. I respected those vows. I didn't want to be divorced, but I had to do it in order to kind of save myself. And fast forward a couple of years later, when I'm sitting across the dinner table from this lovely guy, it doesn't have that like crazy chemistry, but I'm enjoying myself. And it feels so lovely. And I don't want it to end. But I go, well, maybe we're just meant to be friends. And thank goodness I kept spending more time with him and realizing, you know what? That old chemistry wasn't healthy chemistry. It was a signal that I was doing it again. And this thing that feels so easy and calm and enjoyable. Like it doesn't have those high highs, which I think we go, well, I want the high highs. It's the like, you know, I want that whatever Cinderella version of the story. This was just like consistent and safe and harmonious and fun. And thank goodness I just hung in there long enough till I was like, this is the thing I've wanted my whole life. And to this day, 10 years in, it's the healthiest, most loving, respectful relationship. You know, we don't have a perfect relationship. I say that all the time, but I do want people to know how different it feels. This man has never lied to me. He has never manipulated me. I only feel his respect. He has his stuff. I have mine. When we come together to talk about it, it is honest. It's about authentic compromise, not I'm going to totally abandon myself in order for you to have your needs met. And I'm going to hope one day you're going to swing around. It does not feel like that, not for one day. And it's possible, right? Because I only had a lifetime of really the dysfunction, even if the dysfunction was just like, they're not available. They're not available. Maybe they're kind, but they just don't want what I want. I only had experiences of not ever getting my needs met. And this is radically, radically different.
And that's what I realized in this, you know, forgiveness experience that I had, which was pretty recent, when I decided, you know, if this is what you want to go away, just here you go. I forgive you. And I wasn't expecting a message back. And the response that I got was, thank you. I forgive you too.
Oh gosh.
And I laughed. I actually giggled. You know, I was in the nail salon and I actually giggled and I thought, oh, okay. But I said, you know what? it took me so long to break through this experience of this was my fault and forgiving myself, not just because of, sure, the one mishap, but also for like taking it so hard and taking your responsibility of all of this. And my response was, sure, thank you. I guess I needed to hear that too, you know, and I took the high road and I said, be well, and that's it. And, you know, I was going through a lot of grief at that time and more dead end kind of tone deaf messages. And I said, you know what, this has been an interesting exchange, you know, be well. And I just walked away and, you know, physically from where I was to find another surprising experience when I left. You know, my car had been completely destroyed, but it made me laugh because I'm like, oh, the moment you let go of something that is so like damaging, then the universe is testing you like, are you sure? Are you sure you're done? And I just laughed for the whole thing. I had already deleted his phone number. He kept messaging me like, well, I can't believe we're going to part away with such a negative message. Fine. And I'm like, it's over, dude. Like, let it go. And I just kept laughing and the messages kept going. And he tried to be sweet again and be like, are you okay?
Try it all.
Okay. You know, and seeing those strategies until the end when he's sending me music and I was looking at the song, I was like, sure, let me play this. And it literally was a song about, oh, I'm so lonely, I'm on the edge. And I started laughing so hysterically. I'm like, did you listen to this song? Like, why are you sending me a song about being lonely? And I'm just like, this is hilarious. And I forgot how funny you were. And I meant that genuinely, you know, because that's the thing that I thought was very entertaining about this person, is that they were so funny just by being who they were. And it was, I mean, I was laughing and then I started interacting with somebody else and put my phone down, and that was the end of that night. But I woke up to a message that said, you know what, I think since you're fine, we should end here, be well. And I just laughed again and I was like, okay. But it was a great moment for me because I realized here I was, and it's exactly what we've been talking in this episode, is like my hopes that you would see things differently, that you would change. And every single interaction since I've met you, you've proven to me you're not that person. You don't have that capacity to feel this way, to connect to people in this way. He's very talented in like reenacting and representing emotion, because I think he knows exactly what that is, not necessarily how he feels. And so I thought, you know what, there's this other person who seems genuine and kind, and like, why am I wasting my time with you? So my response in that morning was, thank you. And I said, I've met someone and I'm going to give that a shot. And out of respect, I think we should no longer communicate. Be well. And that was it. Thank God. I haven't heard anything else, but it was a really interesting experience for me to be confronted with all of this and hearing you talk. And I'm like, God, what a bullet that I dodged. But what I'm very curious about it is like, how did you make this change from this unconscious attraction of, oh, I'm feeling the butterflies and this, what do they call it? Like, right. This, spark, the idea of the spark, right? Which could be this unconscious attraction to somebody that we're so familiar with from a traumatic experience. So once you realize that, how did you change that? How did you change how you showed up in your life to then meet someone that was kind and loving and accept that? I had one boyfriend who once told me, like, every time you give me love, it makes my skin crawl. And that stuck with me because I understood many years later that, like, oh, he just didn't know what love felt like. And it made him uncomfortable.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So
Well,
us, right?
I think that's why I mentioned the divorce as being a pivotal moment for me. I wasn't doing it so that I could change my chemistry. That wasn't even on my radar. But it was a fierce act of self-love and of choosing myself and what I actually deserved, whether anyone else was going to validate that for me or not. And I think the essence of that, it's going to look different for everybody, you know, because we have different stories. But I think the essence of that feels universal. It's like, what would it look like if I was fiercely having my own back? What would it look like if I stopped settling in 8 million ways? What would it look like if I stopped giving the benefit of the doubt and I looked at the evidence, I looked at the truth, I looked at the patterns, I looked at my life, how much I was sort of swallowing and sitting on and tolerating. And I said, I'm going to do it differently. What would that look like? And then to actually do it, right? Because what we're talking about too with like our bodies and our nervous system is they learn by experience. That's why I could have all this information, even growing up, like this is a dysfunctional family or an alcoholic family. But my experience was only, this is family.
Yeah.
This is family. And the same was true in relationships. It's like, well, this is just relationships. Everybody has to compromise. Nobody's perfect. Until I said, wait a second, I want something different. And I need to choose it, even if that choice only looks like I'm walking away from what's not working. And I think that was a huge part of the shift for me. And generally speaking, you know, trauma healing, it's never linear. It's not like we go better, 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 but it's like this and this and this and forward, backwards, to the side. It's like this crazy jig. And I think my divorce was a big piece of it. And then I was able to meet my husband, but I also didn't start this deeper dive and even knowing that it was trauma or trauma reenactment until after I was married a second time. I was already in this relationship that's so different from everyone I've always experienced. But from this place in my life, if I could go back, I would say, go to trauma therapy, get a trauma therapist, because just talking about our stories is not engaging the part of the brain and the nervous system where these things live and breathe. I had talked about my story till I was blue in the face. It never gave me a shift. So experiential types of therapy, you know, I have, as a clinician, I've done somatic experiencing and EMDR and find them both very powerful. And as a client, most recently, my therapist is an IFS therapist, internal family systems, and that's a very powerful, helpful therapy for complex trauma. I think getting the support and getting this right support, you know, the right tool for the job essentially is really important. And also just educating ourselves. Like, I think it's kind of amazing. Like I said, there was this whole conversation happening out there about complex trauma, relational trauma, narcissistic abuse. I didn't know it was happening. And so if any of this resonates, go look up your own hashtags. Trauma reenactment. What is that? Right? Fawning trauma response. What is that? I just wrote an article on that for Psychology Today, so you can go look that up too, or go to my website. But see what you identify with, right? And just let these stories, let these ideas kind of wash over you, and then trust the process. Again, to go back to where we started, it's like there's only so much we can consciously do. And then when the body is ready, I think the healing will come. And that's what happened with the writing. I didn't set out to seek healing in this way. It's the way that healing was able to come when my body was ready to receive it. And so I think that also reduces the shame, because it's like, well, why didn't I, you know, cut off contact 10 years ago? And it's like, because it wasn't safe. I didn't feel safe. The body will always prioritize safety over my opinions of what I think should happen and when it should happen. And so I just accept that. And I go, okay, thanks, body. Wow, you are doing an amazing job. And you do it all without my, you know, being in the driver's seat. And I think that's kind of incredible when you really think about it.
I love that. And for, you know, as we wrap up this episode, for people who are in the middle of a relationship where they're questioning, is this a narcissist? Is this an abusive relationship? You know, as we've been discussing, I've been there. It's like, how do I know if this is a person who's coming from their own trauma and this is just a trauma response? Or how do I know if this is somewhat intentional, or they are kind of, I don't say intentional because I feel like they're so maybe evil, you know, and to put us, somebody is the villain of the story. But I mean, like, they're aware of what they're doing. They are aware of this, you know, gaslighting, or they are aware of trying to mine your own self, as your own like self-trust.
Yeah. Yeah. In a way, it's so funny because on one hand, the language was very important to me, narcissistic abuse, because it gave me all this other language that put things in context in a way that I was like, oh, that's gaslighting. Oh, that's the silent treatment. Oh, that's what that is. That's what that is. But on the other end of that spectrum, I go, the labels don't really matter. It doesn't honestly matter if someone is like best intentions, but it's all trauma reenactment on their end. It's all trauma response. If they're not doing the actual work, if you don't see actual change, if your needs aren't being met time and time again, I don't care what you call it. you're allowed to take care of yourself. It like just can lower the bar on, like, we don't all have to become clinical psychologists in order to go, I deserve to have my needs met in a relationship. You just do. You just do. We're allowed to have healthy boundaries.
And I love the sharing, of your testimonial of like, oh, I thought I wasn't going to find someone, or that I wasn't incapable, I wasn't healed enough. And I love that you shared it wasn't until after you were already married the second time that you really dove deep into this work, because I think a lot of us, including me, in this last year of like tourism therapy, where I tried so many different things, to try to find understanding and hope in the human race in a different way, that you start to realize like, when am I healed enough for a healthy relationship?
Yeah, there's no perfect finish line there. I think that people are doing themselves a disservice by going, oh, I'm not ready yet. Like all of life, I think this is true, is trial and error. It's all experience, right? And what we all do is we just do the best that we can with what we have and the tools that are at our disposal, and let these ideas wash over you. What is this self-love idea? What is this like healthy attachment business? Like, where do I see that in my life? And be curious, but we don't have to be compulsive. We don't have to be compulsive in it. It's like, oh, I have to spend 24 hours of everyday healing. And it's easy to think that way. It's like, no, you're allowed just to be in your life and be gentle with yourself. That is actually an exercise in healing. Just self-compassion, just grace, rest, and my whole body's responding to those words. I'm like, you need some of that right now. That all counts big time.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has been such an empowering chat about really taking ownership of yourself and what you deserve in relationships.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for you being here today. Please share with our audience your handles where we can find you.
Well, thank you again for having me. I feel like we could have just talked all day. We just barely scratched the surface, but we also covered a lot of ground. So I'm grateful for that. You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Ingrid Clayton, PhD. And I think that's the same thing on TikTok and YouTube and Facebook and all the places. And my website is just ingridclayton.com. And the book is on Amazon and Audible. It's called Believing Me. It is a memoir, so it's not your traditional self-help book. It's my story as honestly as I can tell it. And yeah, those are all the places.
Thank you so much. I'll make sure to mention all of those on the episode notes and make sure that our listeners can find you.
Thank you so much.